In a course that's grading using traditional grading methods, there really isn't much to figuring out what a student's final grade is going to be. Assessments either have a certain number of points or are scored as a percentage and are weighted in such a way that at the end of the course there is a total or an average, which is then mapped onto letter grades based upon a scale. In a specs grading or standards-based grading situation, however, there's no simple calculation for figuring out what a student has earned. Every course is probably going to have its own map that translates requirements and standards or outcomes into final letter grades. I'm going to show you a few basic things about setting up letter grades in SpexArray that can be the basis for your own grading system. Here on the grade screen, we're going to focus on letter grades at the moment. I'll talk about grade modifiers separately. I'm going to presume that at your institution, students are still required to have a letter grade, A through F roughly, at the end of the semester. To create a letter grade, I'm going to click the plus sign. I'm going to start with the bottom of the scale, so I'm going to start with the letter F. I'm going to click Save, and that's all I'm going to do. In my courses, F is basically a catch-all, meaning any student who has not earned a higher grade gets caught by F, which means that there's really no work I need to do to setting it up. Now I'm going to create the grade of D. I'll click that plus sign again, enter a D, and click Save. And now I'm going to click the pencil next to the letter D. Now this is actually one of the oldest screens in SpexArray, and because setting up grades happens once a semester, I will admit that this is something of a clunky display which could be upgraded significantly. I apologize for that. Calculating letter grades in SpexArray happens by way of creating groups. To earn a letter grade, a student has to pass all the requirements for that group. In this fictitious class, getting a D is going to be fairly easy. I'm going to click a plus sign here, which is going to create a new group, and I'm just going to call it Content Modules, and I'll click the Save button. When you add a group, you get two specific areas. One is required items, the other is optional items. In order for a student to pass the Content Modules group, they would have to pass every single one of the required items, and then they would have to pass a certain number of optional items. In this case, to get a D, students will have to pass one out of the Content Modules in the course. To add a requirement to this group, I'm going to click the plus sign. Then I have to choose whether what I'm adding is required or optional. I'm going to say optional, and I'm going to choose Content Module 1. Then I'm going to do the same thing for all the other content modules. Now by default it says 0. I'm going to have it so that students can get a D if they pass one content module. I'm going to click on that 0, turns into a text field. I'm going to type 1, and then I'm going to just click off of it. And now I've set up my grade of D. If I was to go to my student dashboard, then click on one of my students to go to their checklist, you would now see a couple of things. First of all, you'd see two grades, the F and the D, and the F is highlighted in green because this is the grade that they have currently earned because, well, there are no requirements for this grade. You would also see under the D that there's a Content Modules group, that there is one checkbox here. Now it's blue because it represents an optional requirement. If I click on it, we would see that it actually indicates that we get to choose one out of the 4 different content modules. To collapse that, I can just click choose again. Now I'm going to set up a C. Now to make things a little easier, there is a way to copy the requirements from one letter grade to another. That copy, however, is a multi-stage process. It begins by creating the new letter grade, the destination letter grade. I'm going to create C, and then I'm going to go into the grade that I want to copy from. So I'm going to go into D, and I'm going to click the pieces of paper up here, which will copy from D and into C. Once I hit copy, nothing obvious will happen. But if I go back to the grades display and click on the pencil for C, you'll see that all that has been copied over. C needs to be harder than a D, so we're going to change this optional items to 2 so that students have to pass 2 of these modules. Let's add another requirement to the grade of a C. Let's require that students complete a certain paper before they get a C. I'm going to go back up to the plus at the top, and I'm going to label this written work. Click Save. Then here, I'm going to click the plus and add a required item. Require that they complete the persuasion paper. If I were to go to the dashboard, and look at one of my students, you would see now that there are 2 boxes here under C, 2 groups, and notice that since we already had entered scores for the persuasion paper and Thomas Jefferson passed it, he actually now has passed that group. Notice the green check and the green text. We can finish setting up the grades by continuing this process. I'll add a B, go into the grade of C, and copy that into the B. Go back out to the B. Let's require 3 out of 4 content modules for a B. And let's add in another required paper, the research paper. Now let's add the grade of A. I'm going to copy the B requirements into A. I'm going to add an extra requirement that only shows up for grades of A, and that is a project. I'm going to add a required item, which is that special project. And I'm also going to set it so that all 4 content modules are required. Now, I could set this optional items to 4, but what I really should do is I should actually probably put all of them under required items since they actually will be all required. I'm going to use the trash can to delete these particular items, and I'm going to add them back under the required. I'm also then going to set this optional back to 0. There's a small quirk right now that means I need to do that. But if I go now and take a look at one of my students' checklists, we'll see that we're all set up and we have a great visual way to track the progress that students are making.